What the hell do you think you're doing in my bed? Julian Blackwood's voice shattered the stillness like a hammer against glass. He stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, his tall frame rigid with rage, disbelief carved into every hard line of his face. Rainwater dripped from his expensive coat, but he didn't seem to notice. All his attention was locked on the woman in his bed, Clara Evans. She shot up from the mattress, heart pounding, her eyes wide not with guilt, but with shock. The twin boys, Leo and Finn, lay curled on either side of her, finally asleep after a long, difficult night. Their faces were soft in the dim light, their breathing deep and even. "I can explain," Clara said quietly, her voice a calm whisper, trying not to wake the boys. Her hands lifted slightly in a gesture of peace. They were scared. Finn started crying, and Leo got a nosebleed. Julian didn't let her finish. His fury, born from months of grief and frustration, overflowed. His palm came down fast, a sharp crack echoing off the walls as it struck her cheek. Clara staggered back, gasping, one hand flying to her face. She didn't cry out. She didn't even speak. Her eyes just locked on his, stunned more by the blow than by his anger. "I don't care what excuse you have," Julian growled, his voice low and menacing. "You're fired. Get out of my house. Now." She stood still for a moment, hand pressed to her cheek, steadying her breath. When her voice came, it was a whisper, filled with a strength he hadn't expected. "They begged me not to leave them. I stayed because they were finally calm. Finally safe. Get out." Clara glanced down at the boys, still sleeping so deeply, so peacefully, as if the shadows that haunted them had finally lifted. She leaned over gently, kissing the top of Leo's head, then Finn's. Then she stepped away from the bed, shoes in hand, and walked past Julian without another word. He didn't stop her. He didn't apologize. Downstairs, the housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, turned as Clara descended the stairs. The red mark on her cheek spoke volumes. The older woman's eyes widened in shock, but Clara just gave a slight shake of her head and continued toward the door. Outside, the rain had softened to a drizzle. Clara pulled her coat tighter and began the long walk toward the front gate. Back upstairs, Julian stood in the master bedroom, breathing hard. He looked at the bed again, his jaw tight, and then something registered. The quiet. He moved closer. Leo's brow was smooth. No tossing, no whimpering, no cold sweat. Finn's thumb was in his mouth, but his other hand was resting on the blanket, perfectly relaxed. They were asleep. Not drugged. Not exhausted from crying. Just, asleep. His throat tightened. 14 nannies, therapists, doctors. Countless hours of screaming fits and inconsolable anxiety since their mother had passed. And yet, Clara, this quiet, unassuming woman, had managed what none of them could. And he had struck her for it. He sank onto the edge of the bed, head in his hands. A wave of shame so profound it felt like drowning washed over him, hot and suffocating. On the nightstand, a note lay folded once. He opened it. "If you can't stay for them, at least don't push away the ones who will." It wasn't signed. He read it twice, then a third time. Down the hall, Mrs. Gable appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of pity and disapproval. "Sir," she said softly. "She didn't touch a thing in here. Only brought them in when the little one had his nosebleed. She stayed because they asked. That's all. They didn't ask for me. They didn't ask for anyone else. Just her." Julian looked up, his eyes dark with something more than anger now, something closer to despair. He looked from the peacefully sleeping boys to the note in his hand, and for the first time since his wife's death, tears welled in his eyes. They weren't tears of grief, but of a terrible, gut-wrenching shame. What had he done? The next morning, Julian stood in his son's room with a tray of breakfast. He hadn't done this before, not once since their mother died. "Where's Miss Clara?" Finn asked, his voice groggy. "Is she gone?" Leo sat up, his eyes sharp and knowing. Julian nodded, the shame from the night before still a heavy weight in his chest. "She had to leave." "Why?" Finn's voice cracked. "She didn't do anything bad," Leo said, his eyes narrowing. "She helped us." Julian knelt beside the bed. "It wasn't your fault." "It was mine." Finn looked at him hard. "Did you yell at her?" Julian couldn't lie. "Yes." "Did you hit her?" Leo's voice was low, an accusation. Julian's throat tightened. He gave a single, wretched nod. Both boys turned away from him, a silent, unified judgment that was more painful than any argument. He stayed there, kneeling on the carpet, the silence stretching. "I'll fix it," he said finally, his voice raw. "I'll bring her back." He started with the address on her application. A small town in Georgia. But Mrs. Gable corrected him. "She volunteers at the downtown community shelter when she's not working. Try there first." Julian didn't knock. He stepped into the old community center just as the sun was setting. He scanned the room, spotting Clara at the far end, crouched beside a whiteboard, erasing crooked letters. She was talking to a teenage girl, her voice lighter than he remembered, unburdened. He didn't realize he'd been holding his breath until she looked up and saw him. The warmth in her expression vanished, replaced by a cool, guarded stillness. He walked forward, his hands empty. "I need to talk to you." She nodded, leading him outside to a bench by the bus stop. "I was wrong," he said immediately, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "I judged you. I reacted without listening, and I put my hands on you. That's something I will regret for the rest of my life." Clara said nothing, her gaze fixed on the street. "I saw you in my space, in my bed," he continued, "and I let fear speak louder than the truth. It was cruel and unforgivable. You didn't believe me," she said, her voice tired. "Even after your sons trusted me." "I know," he said, his own voice thick with remorse. "You don't get to walk back into my life because you finally realized I was telling the truth." "I'm not here for me," he said. "I'm here because they asked for you. Not a nanny. You." Clara's eyes softened slightly. "How are they?" "Quiet," he admitted. "Too quiet." She nodded slowly. "That's not peace. That's a wound closing over without healing. I want to fix this," he pleaded. "You can't fix a blow, Mr. Blackwood. But you can start by acknowledging that what your sons need isn't control. It's connection," he exhaled. "Come back." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she asked, "If I say yes, what changes?" He hesitated. "You'll have whatever title you want. Advisor. Mentor. Partner, in their care," he clarified, though the word lingered in the air. "Fine," she said, her tone firm. "But I have conditions. First, they eat dinner at the table. With you. No phones, no business," he nodded. "Second, we rewrite the house rules together. With them." He stared at her. "They're 5. They're people," she replied. He cracked the smallest of smiles. "Anything else?" She took a deep breath. "Yes. The next time you raise your hand to someone who doesn't deserve it, anyone. I'm gone. And I won't come back." His expression fell. "Understood." She stood. "I'll see them in the morning. Do you want a ride?" She shook her head. "I'll take the bus." She turned and walked back into the building, leaving him standing on the curb, watching her go. The next morning, Clara returned. The boys rounded the staircase and flew into her arms. Leo thrust a sketchbook at her. On the page was a wobbly drawing of her and the two boys under a house with a big heart over it. The caption read, "You stayed even when you left." In the kitchen, the four of them gathered around the table. Clara pulled out a notebook. "We're going to talk about what makes this house feel like a home." Over the next hour, they scribbled rules with crayons: always knock. No yelling near bedtime. Hugs must be asked for. Pancakes on Sundays. Edward added a line in neat handwriting: make space for forgiveness, even when it's hard. Clara taped the paper to the refrigerator. The new rules of the house. Weeks turned into months. The house, once echoing with silence, now hummed with life. But their newfound peace was fragile. A letter arrived, formal and cold. A notice of a custody hearing. The boys' maternal grandparents, the Ashworths, were filing for guardianship, claiming Julian was an unfit father. On what grounds? Clara asked, her face pale as she read the document over his shoulder. He scoffed, a bitter sound. Neglect, emotional instability, and a domestic incident involving household staff. They found out, she whispered. About me. They've been watching, he muttered. Waiting for a chance to prove I'm failing. The courtroom was cold and imposing. Eleanor Ashworth took the stand, her voice dripping with condescension. What kind of man hires an unqualified stranger to raise his children? A woman who, by his own admission, he struck in his own home. She has no degrees, no license. She isn't family. The judge turned to Clara. Miss Evans, do you wish to respond? Clara stood and approached the bench. She carried no notes. She didn't need them. I don't have a degree in child psychology, she said, her voice clear and steady. But I know what it looks like when children stop believing they're safe. When I arrived, Leo and Finn didn't speak to anyone but each other. They didn't sleep. They didn't trust. But little by little, they let me in. Not because I'm special, but because I stayed. Because I didn't run when it got hard. Because I looked them in the eye and told them they mattered. She met Eleanor's gaze. You say I'm unqualified. But what qualifies someone to love children who aren't theirs? To choose them every single day, without obligation. Because that's what I've done. Not for a paycheck, but because someone needed to. Later, the judge delivered her verdict. This court sees no grounds to remove custody from Mr. Blackwood. He has taken meaningful, consistent steps toward healing his family, in large part due to the support of Miss Evans. Petition denied. Outside in the cool autumn air, Julian turned to her, his eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite name. You saved them. Again. She shook her head. No. We did. That night, after tucking the boys in, he found her on the back porch, staring up at the stars. The fireflies were beginning their nightly dance over the sprawling lawn. I've never been good at saying thank you, he said quietly, standing beside her. Then don't, she replied. Just keep showing up. He nodded, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking until it was barely there. The air was thick with all the things they hadn't said, all the pain and healing that had led them to this moment. Clara, he began, his voice barely a whisper. What you did, staying, leaving, coming back, it was more than I deserved. It's what they deserved. But you taught me what it means to be a father again. You taught me what it means to be a man. She looked up at him, her heart beating a little faster. I know I have no right to ask for anything more, he continued, his gaze intense. But I have to. The boys, they see you as their mother. And I see you as my partner. In everything. He took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. I'm not the man I was when we met. You changed that. You healed this family. You healed me. He took a deep breath. Clara Evans, will you marry me? Will you make this our family, officially? Tears she hadn't realized were forming began to trace paths down her cheeks. They weren't tears of sadness or pain, but of a profound, overwhelming joy. She thought of the angry man in the doorway, the slap that had echoed in the quiet room, and the long road they had traveled since. She thought of the little boys sleeping peacefully upstairs, finally safe, finally home. She looked at the man before her, no longer a millionaire defined by his grief, but a father defined by his love. "Yes," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "Yes, Julian. I will." He pulled her into his arms, and as he held her, she knew this wasn't just the end of a long and difficult chapter. It was the beginning of everything. Because a home isn't built from marble and glass, but from the quiet, powerful choice to stay, to heal, and to love, even after the storm.